Weisberg here, along with the silent assassin, Matt Costa, Stephanie Burke, and Matt Moniz, both off tonight. Different reasons. They're not playing hooky on us and going out on a date or anything. Stephanie will kill me for saying that. They're both working other jobs tonight. Stephanie in her job as a mom. Moniz in his other job that he's been working. I don't know if we can talk about that. It's not paranormal related, but it's interesting, and he'll share more with us when he can. So, Matt, you said that there was a question that came up?
Oh, someone was wondering on Facebook Live how they can start getting more involved in the paranormal.
Well, they are already taking the first step by listening to this show, Spooky South Coast. We will not lead you astray. We promise. But I would say that if you want to get more involved in things, the best thing to do is to read and research. Do that before you pick up any devices and run out into the dark. Always learn what it is that you're doing first before you go out. Like when you go out and buy a car or a TV or a computer or whatever, you shouldn't just go out there and walk around the store and see what grabs you. You should shop around a little bit. When you go out to buy a house, you don't go take the first house you see most of the time. You look around a little bit. And you research and you find things out and you make an informed decision. And it's the same thing with the paranormal. You got to research it a little bit first. And our guest tonight is Paul Eno. He's been researching the paranormal for quite a number of years. And I will ask Paul that same question. Paul, you touched upon a little bit in the first hour, but if somebody asked you that question, hey, how do I get involved in the paranormal? I know that you had said that your advice is don't, but say that doesn't work. What's the first step that you recommend to somebody?
Well, I'll say what I said after I said that to that audience. And I said, well, here we all are. You're going to do it almost certainly. So we might as well discuss how to stay safe. My suggestion is that you certainly would echo yours, Tim, that reading. But the question is, what do you read?
Right.
Which expert can you trust? These are difficult questions. Sometimes people are far away from the people whom they believe they can trust. But of course, with today's communications, you can probably talk to them. I think also what you said before that was certainly have to be grounded, to be as mature spiritually in the broadest sense of that word, and psychologically as you can be. If you are a china plate because you have you're high strung or you have issues with particularly addicting substances, certainly drugs and alcohol. These are all bad things if you're going to be going into any of these cases. But I couldn't agree more with the idea that before you grab whatever you're going to grab and go out and run into cemeteries and stuff, become as knowledgeable as you can and don't do it alone. Okay. I don't, which books you can read. There are people who have been in the field for a long time, including myself. I've written a bunch of books on this, but that doesn't, but maybe I'm wrong. You can do something wrong for 40 or 50 years. I just would say use your judgment. And another thing that's very important, I would say, is follow your instincts. If you feel uncomfortable in a certain situation, get out of there.
Right. If
you feel uncomfortable with a certain person, we have those instincts from our remote ancestors who, if they didn't have them, we wouldn't exist. Because, if you didn't have the feeling that the saber-toothed cat was behind you looking at you as a possible hot lunch, our ancestors never would have survived. So follow your instincts. Just if you have to do it, then I'd say just everything we've said, grounded, be strong, learn as much as you can, and don't be alone, and follow your instincts.
Well, and like you said, it's hard to figure out who to read first and who to learn from. But one book I always recommend to people who want to get involved. It's one thing to want to get involved in research, but if you want to get involved in the quote-unquote community, I highly recommend a book by a guy named Steve Volk that came out about 5-6 years ago. It's called Fringeology. And it basically turns it's a skeptical point of view, or actually more of a journalistic point of view, reporting on all of this sudden interest in the paranormal. So it gives you an insight into it before you actually dip your toes into the water. And then the other suggestion that I always make to people, see, because people want to get involved in this, and they immediately will say, well, I'm going to go start looking for people that I can help in residential cases because I don't have to pay to get into those places. And so one of the things that I always recommend to people is, you know what? Go find the local ghost tour in your area. Go find the haunted location that has a historical tour. Go in and spend some time in these places and see how you feel. Because if you feel skittish, if you feel like you're uneasy being in these places, well, then you shouldn't be putting yourself in positions where you're trying to be the bridge between somebody else and the problems that they're having if you're not sure that you're going to have a problem with it either.
That's a good suggestion. One more caveat I guess this is about 10 suggestions we're giving here, is that the paranormal should be your last resort as an answer to anything that's going on. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are all sorts of psychological complications. One of the there are certain lines you draw. One of the reasons I was working with Father Cotter in one of these state hospitals in New York State was because somebody's diagnosed with schizophrenia because they hear voices, they see things, and they may or may not be experiencing real parallel worlds. However, when they're lying in the bed in their room and stuff's flying off the shelves on the other side of the room, the doctors would call us because obviously the person isn't doing this. It's something that's beyond the pale of ordinary medicine, and that's why we were there, among other things. So be sure that the paranormal is your last resort, and don't be afraid to consult experts. I've been told by particularly psychologists and psychiatrists that I'm more skeptical than they are because they see these things. Clergy, police, and psychologists and psychiatrists see these things more than most. Okay. Now, if I may, if there's time, Tim, to turn this around a little bit, there's also the situation where you may have little or no interest in getting involved in the paranormal and don't pursue it actively, but it happens to you. You live in a quote unquote haunted house, right? Or you're out, at the campfire there, and all of a sudden, what appears to be a UFO lands in the next field, and they walk up to you, and this sort of or Bigfoot experience. Something paranormal happens to you without you seeking it. Okay, that really requires sort of a different approach, I would think.
Well, you mentioned the clergy. We talked a little bit about your background in the past, and I had asked you that question in the first hour about the barriers coming down between the UFO people and the ghost people. How much of those barriers are coming down between theologists and people who look at things through a religious lens and people who research the paranormal? Because I know that was always a point of contention for a lot of investigators, is that you would run up against a lot of resistance from those in the clergy or from those who are just looking at things through a religious lens.
Oh, sure. Well, one thing to realize, Tim, I think, is, and a lot of people don't realize this, is that clergy are not, and even Roman Catholic priests are not routinely trained in this subject. People assume they are, but that's not true. I mean, you study theology, the history of the church. There's a little bit of it in your final year, your deacon year in the Roman Catholic Church. And in the Orthodox Church, it's really not touched on very much. And in most Christian groups, it's considered to be demonic. So people are not, when they are trained in it, it's a very narrow point of view. And the ones who are trained in the Roman Catholic Church are the ones who end up the diocesan exorcists. Every diocese has or is supposed to have at least one priest who is specifically trained and prepared to go into situations where they judge that an exorcism is required, or at least that some kind of counseling is required to resolve what they consider a paranormal situation. In my day, we were coming off December of '73 when the Exorcist film was released, and all of a sudden, front and center was this topic. You never heard about it really much before that. I was interested in it, of course, but I was weird. So they clammed up. And I would say, and again, like they're going to listen to me, I'm a young seminary student. They didn't like me even being involved with the Warrens. They didn't like the Warrens. They didn't like any of the stuff I was doing. But I said, why don't you just tell people this is what we believe? Don't worry about it. This is what you do. But no, they just clammed up, which only makes people more curious. So that probably was a mistake. But now, as I understand, now I'm out of touch with all those channels now. But I had two friends at the Vatican who were priests, one of whom worked in the secret archives. There really is such a place, actually, in the library. But, like they're going to tell me. I'm the last one they're going to tell what's going on. But there does seem to be a new openness as far as the ideas about exorcism and training of exorcists is concerned. Now, there are people running around. Ed Warren claimed to be the only official sanctioned exorcist. I never saw any proof of that. I mean, with all due respect to him, he was a good friend. But, and there are people who call themselves demonologists and all this. And if there's any formal training or approval by the Roman Catholic Church of these people, I'm not aware of it. Right. So, I mean, these are people I would be very careful about, anybody who calls themselves a demonologist. But there may be a new openness about it, but not that open where they're just taking people off the hobbyist street there and making them exorcists. That's just not happening.
Well, I think that some people who have had a long experience around it, somebody like Keith Johnson, he does do exorcism work when necessary, and he does consider himself a lay demonologist. He considers himself somebody who is familiar with it and experienced with it, but would never never try to supersede the church in any way. I think that people like that, there is a need for, and there is a lot that can be learned from watching them, observing them, and from studying with them. But too often now, being a demonologist is just your quote-unquote role within your paranormal group. Somebody has to be the UFO guy. Somebody has to be the equipment guy. Somebody has to be the psychic. Somebody has to be the demonologist. It becomes what you're going to put under your name on the website more than it is what you're actually going to concentrate on and devote your life to.
Well, that's it. Well, I have no right to say whether someone's qualified or not. I certainly wouldn't do it. I just assisted at these exorcisms in the past, but it just, from my seminary training, such as it was and as far as it went, I just would be very careful about, applying labels to myself like that. So, but again, that's people have to make their own way. But as far as considering yourself something or not, I mean, I want someone who knows more than I do to be considering me. But that's me.
Have you had have you had experiences in paranormal research that have made you question things that you studied in the seminary, that have made you wonder if I know that you yourself and Ben, you talk frequently on the show about the connection between ghosts and God. Have you seen things that have kind of made you maybe have a more direct connection with God and with a greater power than the human interpretation of things is what I'm saying. Has that kind of opened your eyes more in a spiritual manner than if you had just gone to seminary, learned things, and never realized that the paranormal was real?
Well, how long is your show, Tim? I really have to answer kind of a big yes to most of that. My beliefs are very different than they were then. I found the with the greatest respect, particularly for the Orthodox Church, where I ended up after graduating from my second Roman Catholic seminary, which was the college level. I was ready to go on to graduate seminary studies, which would have been 4 years of theology leading to ordination. And I just said, a lot of things I'd learned in the paranormal were that they have made God far too small. And I thought that I saw maybe in the Eastern Orthodox Church, which most people just only know the name, a more ancient and broader view of God. And in many ways, it is. But they're the ones who threw me out of the seminary 2 years in because they didn't like my paranormal work. I should have had my nose in my books, and I was too young to be dealing with this and all this, even though I've been doing it for years and years and years with some of the finest experts, at least in the Roman Catholic Church. So that was as it was, and maybe the church and I both had a lucky escape. But as the years have gone by, yes, I have found. I think that I mean, I have again. I will always respect the church because that's where I learned to love God. But I think that there are. It's just so much bigger that I've seen sort of with paranormal research, especially when you look at the world and its history from the viewpoint of the paranormal. When you really look at it, Tim, the paranormal is the background to the entire human experience. Had there not been questions that our remote ancestors had, why did the saber-toothed cat eat my sister, something like this, or why did this happen, or why did that happen? Or if they had not felt they were in touch with supernatural beings of some kind, there would have been no religion and probably no science. So in a way, you can call the paranormal the mother of both science and religion, which are supposed to be at such odds, but which really are not, except if you're dealing with fundamentalist religionists, So yeah, everything has changed since then. It's changed everything about my point of view, and it has provided insights into maybe how God does things. I'll give you a perfect example if we have the time.
Sure.
People often call my show and say, okay, well, they blame me for not espousing their religious beliefs. Okay, you were in the seminary for 10 years, man and boy, and you believe things that are all crazy and all this. And I said, look, for example, the creation. What did the old catechism say about the creation? What did we learn in church school, Sunday school, whatever you want to call it, CCD, seminary? God created, sort of had to create the world because his love was infinite and it had to be expressed. They didn't really put it that way, but that's essentially what the theology says. So if you have an infinite love, do you express it in one creation? Do you express it in just what you see as what you get, material world, maybe a spirit world? No, you express it, infinite love, in an infinite way, which would be what? The multiverse, which science has been discovering over the past century, or maybe even a little more. An infinite number of interacting, elegantly organized worlds where energy is exchanged, inhabitants sometimes are exchanged, and that does what? Contains, as some quantum physicists believe, every single possibility that has ever existed or ever will exist, all simultaneously. Because Einstein pretty much proved in his 1952 book Relativity that there is no such thing as past and future. It's just a function of our consciousness. Everything exists simultaneously. So you've got a creation that is just as infinite as its creator's love. There could be no other logical explanation for any expression of infinite expression of divine love. So I guess the paranormal, in a sense, I suppose supported by quantum mechanics maybe, transports theology to an entirely new level. I think the great French theologian Pierre Teilhard de Chardin realized that, and this is present in many of his books. He foreshadowed really another aspect of the quantum theory, which I think is just the other side of the coin, which we call the quantum hologram. Okay, he believed. I don't want to get too deep here, but Teilhard de Chardin believed that everything was tending toward a point of unity, the omega point, which was really Christ in his thinking. Everything, all these worlds, well, he didn't think of the parallel worlds, but in the quantum hologram, the matrix is collapsing, the parallel worlds are joining, and that in the end there will be a point of unity, equivalent to what Teilhard de Chardin called the omega point. So that's another big, long answer to a simple question that just required a yes, Tim. But yeah, it's changed, it's deepened my point of view farther than I ever thought it could be deepened.
And that's what
within the church. You know?
I would think that would be the reaction for a lot of people, that you would have to feel like if you encountered proof that there's something more, then you have to think that there's something else guiding that as well. You know, it's easy to think, okay, we're just these, carbon creations that live and die, and, just like
island theory.
Just like plants, we're eventually just going to decompose and go back to whence we came. We're all just stardust, and we go back to being stardust. But if that's if the idea is that this consciousness can go on, well, then that consciousness has to go on for a reason. It can't just be an accident. And so I would actually think that religion would be pushing people toward the paranormal, because it would help kind of sell the idea of, hey, this, first of all, at the very least, it's a morality lesson. You could say, hey, if you don't do what we say, you're going to be one of these ghosts that are stuck behind, wandering around, wondering what's going on, talking to weirdos with tape recorders in the middle of the night. But at the same time, it's also a way to kind of show people there's more than we understand, and there's more than we're meant to understand, and this can kind of be your guiding force for it. Well, I can understand. The religion in a way is a lot like science, and especially when you get up into the clergy and you've studied theology formally and all this stuff. There's a certain discipline that's required because of human nature. People, you don't want people going haywire. As it is, people believe what they want to believe. I sort of have done over the past really 40 years or so informal, unscientific studies of people's religious beliefs and compared them with what they are taught. And in just about every religion, whether it, you can talk about the Muslims, the Christians, the Jews, because the Jews are a little more free-flowing. They're
I think they're refreshing. There's a lot of, it's so old that there's a lot of give and take about the beliefs, and they don't say, aha, you're a heretic or anything like that. But in most religions, there was a set belief system, and it does not correspond with what people, the rank and file, actually believe in many cases. And if it does correspond, they don't understand it the way it was meant to be understood in the original theology. So people in the end really, Tim, believe what they want to believe. So I think your point is correct, but I can see why they are careful with that sort of approach. I mean, I think we all really have to, we learn individually, but we also have to be together. There's a wonderful sort of philosopher / physicist / spiritual fellow whom we like very much, Dr. Amit Goswami, who's written a number of terrific books on quantum physics. And he says that the notion of the individual, our sense of self is an illusion. It's just a sense of self-reference, but we really have this unity. And when you, for example, why is it people, this is what really started me questioning things in the late 70s. People were coming to me having seen ghosts of themselves. They were coming to me having seen ghosts of people who weren't dead yet. One case in Maine really knocked my socks off in 1979, where the girl they were seeing as a ghost walked up to their door because she happened to be driving by and recognized the house. She had dreams of being in the house doing precisely what they had seen her doing as a quote-unquote ghost. Wow. So I said, there's got to be more to this than spirits of the dead. And, the whole multiverse thing and the whole quantum thing, relativity too, obviates the whole question of where do you go when you die. You don't die. You can't. Not even your body. You're existing as one great super personality in countless worlds where you may see yourself, if the world boundaries or brains, BRANES, or membranes, as physicists call them, intersect or overwash or do what they do in areas that cause things we call paranormal. That's our point of view. That's why we got into these flap areas. There seem to be areas like the Ohio Valley with Mothman and all that stuff in the 60s. Central Connecticut right now, where we have seen UFOs. People are seeing things that don't even have names yet, Tim. The standard ghost thing, but we had to at one point convince the long deceased, quote unquote, great grandparents of a woman in a house that she was not a ghost haunting them and that it was okay. Because we weren't into that. People, they're afraid of us because they're going about their daily lives in a perfectly physical manner, in perfectly physical worlds that we see across electromagnetic plasma-charged brains and make them look wispy and cloudy and transparent and all this business. And it's nothing of the kind. Now, I'm not saying there are no spirits, but I think they're in worlds whose laws of physics will be very different from ours and that are not near here at all. This is perhaps the new paradigm that we've been experiencing here, Tim. And I think it really does. Hence, everything you know is wrong. Us too, But again, the spiritual aspects, as we've been discussing, are just as momentous as the aspects for paranormal understanding. So,
I don't know how much I buy into the idea of, excuse me, like, some of the global consciousness experiments. I know Art Bell was always famous for doing that, trying to get everybody in the audience to kind of, push a storm off the coast or things like that. I don't know how much I buy into a lot of that, but I do think that as people are opening up more to these topics, I think there is a collective consciousness among us all that's kind of opening things up a little bit more and inviting more of this stuff to be coming in. And as that happens, we're seeing a more diversity in the paranormal that people are experiencing, because it's almost like, well, if you're willing to accept that, then you've got to be willing to accept this. And it's almost like we're going to keep pushing the boundaries of what we're willing to believe as a race, as a species. And I think that as we're opening up those doors, it's up to people like us, the people who are researching this stuff, to find all the connections between them. And is that something that you've been able to do now, at least in the last couple of years? And as I guess as people have become more open, have you been able to see more of the forest for the trees?
Well, I hope so. It's a difficult question in a way because so many things are happening.
Not to interrupt, but you're dealing with people in a different manner than you might have been in the 70s or 80s now, because now they're awakened to the idea of what these things might be already.
Well, there's a dark side as well, Tim. I mean, rather than demons, we're dealing with what we believe are parasites. In that Bridgeport house in '74, there was one on the Monday evening of the case. The Warrens had gone to be on some show, and I was in the house by myself with the little girl who was apparently the target of what I believe were four. Well, we thought they were demons. Her parents in their 40s, and then a reporter and a neighbor. Four things came out of her bedroom, came down the hallway into the living room. You could see like these gauzy structures. One of them stood right in front of me. I found out the hard way at this point that you don't get angry or fearful or annoyed in the presence of these things because they feed on it. Hence the term parasites we later used. And I pushed against it. Just I knew it was after the little girl. I pushed against it instinctively. Now, this is supposed to be a spirit. It pushed back, and I felt bone structure. Whoa. What the hey was that?
Yeah.
That really threw me. This was a life form, a physical life form. I was confused. It got around me and threw the girl across the room. But, I mean, this really rocked my world. That was the first, well, really the second or third major shakeup I've had. And I really had to sort of rethink everything. So again, it's sort of a new kind of paradigm. And the other thing that really shook us up is when we started running into the military, or what appeared to be the military. And we think now we may at least have a theory about why they turn up every time in these areas. Probably less so in the Bridgewater Triangle. I know you and certainly Chris Bolzano are very, very familiar with, and I respect your experience with that tremendous case. We live on the other side of it from you, so we're all near it. Mm-hmm. But when Ben and I were commenting, we just had one or two experiences there with what could have been puckwudgies. And we're going around a corner and commenting, how come we haven't run into the military yet? And then right there on this dirt road we turned into in the Freetown State Forest, a whole line of unmarked utility trucks with all these guys in sunglasses watching us go by.
Wow.
So our theory is that maybe, it's not the UFO thing that is creating the need for secrecy in their minds. I think that we're ready for the idea, we all grew up with the Klingons and Captain Kirk and the Planet of the Apes. I think if life were to be found on other planets, and a lot of people think they're getting us ready for that, that's fine. We'd all be really excited about that. We all really believe in it. I mean, there aren't too many people left who wouldn't believe that in the vastness of the universe we're all there is. But I think that's not the problem. I think if people were to realize, if our approach is true, that these things are they're not far away. They're right next to you all the time in nearby parallel realities. And some of them can come and go as they please, and certainly seem to do, whether you call them ghosts, Bigfoot, UFOs, aliens, or grays, or whatever you call them. I think that would really shake people up. That would shake society to its roots. People want disclosure. They want the government to come out and say, Steve Bassett does, I know. He wants the government to come out and say that whatever they believe the truth is, no matter how horrifying it is. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think that the multiverse thing, with these things right next to us all the time, not far away at all, is the real secret. And which is why we get cryptic messages. And, of course, some of them, I'm sure, are nutballs. Others, death threats and things of this kind. You're close to the truth. I've had shamans in Quebec and Australia, two different ends of the planet, tell me this is exactly what is happening, and that's what shamans do, although in other terms. I mean, we have a lot of evidence that I consider evidence that this is at least something like what's really happening, and that this may be the secret, maybe the big secret.
Well, one of the things that I think is interesting, of course, we talked a little bit about your latest book, Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know is Wrong, but I know that you have a new project that you're working on, and it's geared toward a different audience. Yes,
this was prompted, I guess, by the library in Danbury, Connecticut, where we've been there once for a sort of a book event, and we gave our presentation on the book. And they had such a crowd, they wanted us back. They booked us for 2 more programs. The director said, why don't you do a program for cryptids not 4 cryptids, 4 cryptids about children. No, but 4 young people about cryptids, monster hunting with Paul and Ben Eno. So I said, well, gee, we've never done a program like that before as such for a young audience. And we said, why don't we put together some of our show scripts that we've done with some of the greatest experts on this subject, Linda Godfrey, Nick Redford, and people of that caliber, and turn it into a book for young people. And our goal is to have it out by the end of June when this event takes place. But I don't know, it's a tall order, and our publisher, we're supposed to, they have first refusal on our next 2 books, and they were very gracious and said, if you think you can do it by then, go ahead, because we can't. So that's the thing. So it's called Behind the Paranormal, Bigfoot, Mothman, and Monsters You Never Heard Of. And we're getting it together now.
Well, and I think, though, that's, again, you see kind of those divisions within paranormal research of people saying, I'm into cryptid stuff because I can believe that there's these creatures that we haven't found yet, but I can't believe in the idea of there being ghosts or aliens or anything like that. And I think those walls are starting to come down too, because so many of these unknown creatures have, kind of mythological and mystical and supernatural properties about them that it's just kind of all starting to blend together. And the fact that you're gearing this, toward younger people and getting them thinking about it means that when they become adults and they have free time and they have the ability to go out and research things on their own, they'll be more open-minded to these things.
Well, you're right, and the lines are going to be blurred certainly in our book, because we're going to get into what are these, what can be mistaken for one. One of the things I was just writing about today was based on our interview, one of our interviews with Richard Valdez from Florida, and I'm sure you've heard of a tremendous database he's gathered for years and years, amazing dedication, wonderful person, of humanoid sightings among other things, and. This is an idea of a crossover kind of idea. November 26, 1973, on this little road in France, and people were sitting in a car there, and all of a sudden a craft came out of the sky, landed in a field. 2 what you might call grays got out. After them, 2 sort of 6 very tall human-looking people got out. They used to call them the Nordics. And then after that, an ape-like creature got out. The others were kind of looking around, but this ape-like creature, presumably some sort of Bigfoot kind of thing, is standing by the craft, and then they all left later. So and the people saw this. So if that's as advertised, then you've got Bigfoot possibly associated with a UFO experience and that sort of thing, and that's not all that rare. Bigfoot as a multiversal creature. The natives will say, well, there's a shapeshifter. He'd be there 1 minute, and gone the next. And so there's all kinds of blending that may not have been seen before, but is being seen to a greater extent now. I
think, though, one of the benefits, I think, of all the stuff that we're going through, all the growing pains that we're going through with the paranormal in the last 10 to 15 years, I think will pay off dividends later on with this younger generation of researchers who are coming up, who are going to say, we can be open to all of these possibilities, because it's kind of like a buffet of what you want to believe in some cases, and what avenues you want to pursue, because you really can't go wrong with any of them. If you want to start looking into ghosts as being, a view into the multiverse, if you want to take the idea that maybe they're dead souls who haven't gone to their next destination, but maybe you also think that there's some sort of beta wave connection amongst all this stuff, and it's human consciousness that's putting it out. You can grab all that, and you can start to
all
meld,
of the above.
Exactly. You can meld all these things together and have a perspective that is far more wide open and far less limiting than the way that people of even my generation and certainly people like yourself who laid the groundwork for it, we had limitations in how far we were willing to go and kind of what our minds could take. And now it seems like those barriers will be knocked down even further for the next wave.
I hope so. But I don't know. I still have despair of those who say that, well, I'm going to prove this to science one way or the other. Well, I think in many ways they might be trying to measure a basketball with a yardstick. It ain't going to work, because science is on a different level, and the scientific method is based on a materialistic assumption that the universe is matter and energy, which is really the effect of matter on other matter, and it's just far too small if what we're dealing with is not just some sort of undiscovered science, which it probably is. But quantum physics is driving the buggy too, because it's pushing the boundaries. It's talking about complete fantasy at the subatomic level. Particles traversing enormous spaces without moving really in between, and causes taking place before the effects that cause them. Science. I'll give a perfect example. Our very capable casting producer for our show lives in New York City, and she's also she just moonlights as the casting producer. She's an old friend of mine. She's a behavioral scientist, and her degrees, all after her name, and she comes out and she says, I've never heard this point of view before, because the sciences don't talk to each other generally. So the science is as much of a problem as paranormal research is when it comes to getting anywhere. And
I feel the same way. I've been kind of pushing the last couple of years myself that I tend to think that ghosts aren't any type of physical being that we will be able to measure and quantify and qualify. That I look at it more as a ghost is an emotion. It's an emotional state. And it's not just like you can't measure love, and just as you can't measure fear or anger, but you can feel them, and you can tell when that feeling is being put out in the room, and you can pick up on that, and you can be perceptive of it. I feel like ghosts are kind of the same thing. It's like an emotional imprint that's still around, but is still alive, in no pun intended.
Well, everything's alive. I mean, if you were dead, you'd be dead. You wouldn't be doing anything.
Right.
But I think that's a progressive view, Tim, certainly, because you're recognizing, for one thing, the relationship between the person experiencing the phenomenon and the phenomenon itself. I think that in itself is progress and can lead to bigger and better things. So it's all good.
I love that argument too. I love getting into that fight with people about, the whole, if a tree falls and nobody hears it, did it really make a noise? And I feel the same way about, paranormal stuff. It doesn't happen if there isn't somebody there to perceive it. The human element, even if it means that you're just watching security footage, 3 months later and discovering that a chair moved on its own, that stuff cannot exist without there being the end result of somebody observing it and the fact that the camera was there meant there was observation to begin with. It has to be observed to exist. There has to be that final stage of everything being all able to all come together.
Well, I'm sure you're warming the hearts of both Werner Heisenberg and Shane Searway right now, because Heisenberg's uncertainty principle was the idea in quantum physics that something can be either a wave or a particle depending on who's looking at it and when. And then Shane's idea that that's people that are really quote unquote haunted, not places as such. So we're making progress here.
I put that theory out in a lecture, and I literally said after it, "Say my name," and somebody said Heisenberg. I said, "You're damn right." So it worked. Right. Worked out that way. But one of the things that I find the most fascinating, at least in recent years, as people have kind of opened up more to this, is the fact that despite what you see on television and despite what you see on some of the paranormal shows that even I work on, the fear element is going away from a lot of this. And I almost feel like I did a lecture on this last year at the Ocean State Paracon about it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to keep that fear. You don't want to become numb to this stuff so much, because then you're missing a key element of being able to experience it, and a key element of keeping yourself observational to things. When you go into a case that you're investigating and researching, I mean, obviously you're not going to be afraid of the result, but do you still have that same trepidation toward walking toward the unknown that keeps you sharp and keeps you on your toes?
Well, this goes into my personal spirituality. I maintain my own rule of prayer and meditation and training to keep the mind clear, okay, and to recognize certain stimuli when they occur just from past experience. So I'll go into a case, and almost always now Ben is with me, and I'd have him by my side anytime. I mean, it's like I feel naked if he's not there. 12 years now he's been working with me, and he is the same way, although he operates kind of on a different level. He's been known to levitate and to go into deep trances and things like this, and that's been caught on camera. But I don't do that kind of thing. Lorraine Warren told me I could, but I didn't want to do that. But no, I think if you keep the grounding and the mind clear and the senses open for the stimuli, I at least don't have any problem with. I'll walk into anything. I've walked into the middle of fields of energy and seen parasites that I later photographed. I believe that's what I believe they are anyway. So I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm in my mid 60s now, and there's very little left to be afraid of. So maybe that's part of it too. So, but again, I agree with you 100%. But I think maybe the older you are, it might be a little easier. At least for me, it's been. I used to get freaked out now and then.
I get more afraid about, where I am and, what I'm walking into in the dark. I'm more afraid. For example, we did an event I think last year, we did an event at Ventford Hall up in Lenox, Massachusetts. Beautiful building. It's where they filmed the Cider House Rules. And all kinds of weird paranormal stuff was going on. Didn't faze me one bit. But, man, when that bat got caught in the basement and was flying right by my face, that's when I was done.
Oh, sure.
No bats.
Well, with the particular technique that I use anyway, at least I believe I'm projecting ahead because, remember, there is no 5 minutes from now. It's happening right now. There is no 5 minutes ago. It's happening right. It's what Ben and I call multiverse awareness. You have to be careful with that because if you start being aware of too many worlds and times, they'll fill your pockets full of antipsychotic drugs, and guys like me from the seminary be visiting you. So you want to avoid that. And so as you move ahead, you have a sense of what is happening around you, and I find that I'm warned most of the time. With what I believe was a Bigfoot experience, first I ever had, totally unexpected. You know how things happen totally unexpectedly,
right?
In these situations. In Pennsylvania last September, I just looked to my right. There it was. Well, a couple hundred feet away. It wasn't right next to me. Walking right up in the brilliant moonlight, and I was looking for strange lights in the sky, which we'd gotten photographs of right next to this house that was having a shadow person problem. So I'm still surprised. But I'm not frightened. Maybe that's dumb. Maybe because there are things you should be frightened of. But I wasn't. I just again, maybe it's my age. I don't know. But that's me. So I just say be grounded.
Well, I mean, as long as you're not putting yourself in a position where, you don't feel. Every time I go into a place, I feel like I'm going to come back out on the other side just fine. And I think
if you're uncomfortable, you don't go blundering recklessly into situations that are dangerous in any way.
That's just how I live my regular life.
Sure.
not the paranormal stuff. But
this is just an extension of that.
I do feel though that as people do put themselves in these situations, they can become, I don't want to say numb to it, but they can become to the point where it takes a lot to surprise them. It takes a lot to really jar them. And I think that actually
that's where I am, I guess.
And I think that's a fine way to be, because then that means that you're not going to get thrown a lot of curveballs. But as long as you're able to do that and not get to the point where you become apathetic about it, that's when you get into a
absolutely
problem.
Right. Yeah.
And so, and it must also have been reinvigorating for you as well when Ben started coming along with you on these investigations, because now you're experiencing things even before you start to realize that he does things a different way than you, and before he came into his own as an investigator, you're just having a new set of eyes with you all the time that's going through and experiencing the same wonders that you did once before.
Oh, that's well put, because that's exactly how I feel, Tim. And it took a little while to get used to him sort of collapsing on the ground and being inert for 5 minutes or so.
That would worry me as a father more than as an investigator, right?
That's the shaman thing, essentially. He doesn't like to talk about that, but that's essentially what that is. And he would become nauseous very often until he became a vegetarian. When he didn't eat meat, everything was fine. And and I would tell people not to touch him because they themselves have become nauseous if they were meat eaters. I mean, there are levels to this that I never imagined before. But Ben operates on a different level than I do, and it's great to be with him. People write to us from all over the world. Gee, I wish I had anything at all in common with my son, but we don't agree on everything. But we sort of work as a good team. We work on different levels, and I think it's kind of complementary.
And before we run out of time, let's let everybody know about the radio show. I know that tomorrow you're having a rebroadcast because of the holiday, but that you guys do bring out fresh content all the time on your show.
Yeah, we usually live every week. It's on WOON 1240. It's just jiggle the numbers. It's the same call letters as yours, but right. 1240 out of Northern Rhode Island, Boston Providence market. And it's called Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. No, just Paul and Ben Eno. And we have, sometimes we take the show ourselves. Other times we have the best guests we can find. I'd like to have you on sometime, Tim. And
Sure.
You've never been on. And it's noon to 1. And the website is behindtheparanormal.com. If you can't catch the show live, you can, there are over 700 hours of broadcasts free on that site, including some podcasts that we did on site with different things, and it's all free. And go crazy. It's great. BehindTheParanormal.com.
Well, we thank you very much for coming back and joining us. Sorry it took so long to reconnect with you, and it certainly won't be 11 years before we have you back on again.
I wasn't in my 60s yet, for Pete's sake.
Hey, we were all younger then.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and certainly, again, if people want to pick up the current book, the new book, it's out right now. You can get it. It's called Behind the Paranormal. Everything you know is wrong, and listen, you can't argue with that, especially with some of the stuff that we've talked about here tonight, and they can pick that right up on BehindTheParanormal.com, right?
That's right, or it's in most of the stores still, so.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for joining us. Give our best to Ben and the rest of the family, and a happy Easter to you.
It was a rousing time, Tim. Thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care. That is Paul Eno, and we will certainly not wait that long to talk with him again, because a fascinating discussion. Again, we touched on areas that I think a lot of people hadn't opened their minds to, and that's what happened. Again, we were fortunate enough to have that happen to us on the second ever Spooky South Coast, to say, hey, you know what? We're just getting into talking about this topic. Let's shake things up a little bit right at the beginning, and that did a fantastic job of making sure that we didn't become complacent in what we thought about what ghosts could be, about what the paranormal is in general. And I think that has paid dividends for us over the years. Certainly, if I had to sit here and just subscribe to one theory of what I thought this stuff was, this show never would have lasted as long, mainly because most of the guests would have gone against what I thought. And I think that it would have kind of gone against the experiences that I later had. So I'm glad that from the very beginning we were able to take things from a different perspective. And one of the other things that I want to thank Paul and that mindset for over the years is it's always made it so that I never discount what somebody else says. So I didn't come into it with a jaded point of view, because right from the beginning I'm hearing something that completely differs from what I think from somebody who's been doing it a lot longer than I had been. Because even at that point, I hadn't even really been doing it. I'd just been reading about it and listening to shows about it and things like that. But I think that's kind of made me understand other people's experiences better too. So going back to that question we had at the beginning of the hour, how do you get involved in this? And first and foremost, number one rule, don't get involved in it if you think you already know the answer, because you don't. Like the book says, everything you know is wrong. So if you just go into it with that perspective, with that mindset, and realize that you're doing it to learn and to experience and to broaden your horizons, you'll be better off. Well, that about does it for this week's show. Next week, we will be at Salem Con. Again, I'm going to try and get something recorded if I can. If not, don't worry. There's 494 shows that will be in the archive for you by then. You can go back and check out some of those. Maybe even go all the way back to the very early archives and check out the first episode with Paul Eno, plus the hundreds and hundreds of other shows that we've done over the years, both through the podcast, through the audio podcast, and the stuff that we have up on YouTube as well. You'll be fine. But of course, you can always just come out to Salem Con and hang out with Stephanie and myself as well. We will certainly come back and share with you all of our adventures from that the week after. Until next week, for Matt, for Stephanie, for Chris, I'm Tim. Stay spooktacular, everybody.